Sarah walked down the old street on a cold winter morning. Snow covered the ground like a white blanket. She pulled her coat tight around her body. The wind made her face red and cold. She was going to work at the small bookstore in town. Sarah had worked there for 3 years now. She loved books more than anything else in the world. Every morning she would open the store and make coffee. The smell of old books and fresh coffee always made her happy. But today was different. When Sarah reached the bookstore, she saw something strange. The door was already open. This was very odd because she always opened the store herself. She was the only one who had the key. Sarah walked slowly to the door. Her heart beat fast in her chest. She looked around but saw no one on the street. The other shops were still closed. It was too early for most people to be awake. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The bell above the door made a soft sound. Everything looked normal at first. The books were still on their shelves. The cash register was in its place. But then Sarah noticed something. There were wet footprints on the floor. Someone had been walking around inside the store. The footprints were bigger than her own feet. They led from the front door to the back of the store. Sarah felt scared but also curious. She followed the footprints with her eyes. They went past the fiction books, past the children's section, and stopped at the old wooden door in the back. That door led to the basement. Sarah never went down there because it was dark and full of old boxes. She heard a noise from downstairs. It sounded like someone moving boxes around. Sarah stood very still and listened. The sound came again. Someone was definitely in the basement. Sarah thought about calling the police. But what if it was just the store owner? Maybe he had come early to check something. But why would he not tell her? And why would he go to the basement? She decided to look for herself. Sarah walked quietly to the back door. The handle was cold under her hand. She turned it slowly and opened the door. Cold air came up from below. There was a light on downstairs. Sarah went down the wooden steps one by one. Each step made a small sound. She tried to be quiet, but the old wood made noise anyway. Halfway down, she could see into the basement. A man was standing with his back. To her, he was tall and wore a dark coat. He was looking through old boxes and papers. Books were scattered on the floor around him. Sarah had never seen this man before. The man seemed to be looking for something specific. He would open a box, look inside quickly, then move to another one. He was in a hurry. Papers fell on the floor as he searched. Sarah watched him from the stairs. She did not know what to do. Should she go back up and call for help? Should she ask him what he was doing? Her legs felt weak with fear. Then the man found something. He pulled out a small book from one of the boxes. It looked very old. The cover was brown and worn. The man smiled when he saw it. He held it carefully in his hands like it was made of gold. Sarah leaned forward to see better. But as she moved, her foot slipped on the step. She grabbed the rail to stop herself from falling. The rail made a loud sound against the wall. The man heard it. He turned around quickly. His eyes met Sarah's eyes. For a moment they both stood very still. The man had gray hair and deep lines on his face. His eyes were dark and serious. Sarah felt her heart jump. She wanted to run, but her feet would not move. The man looked at her for a long time. Then he did something that surprised her. He smiled. The man was not young, but he was not very old. Maybe 50 years old. He had kind eyes even though his face looked serious. He was holding the old book against his chest like he was protecting it. Sarah found her voice. She asked him who he was and what he was doing in the store. Her voice shook a little when she spoke. The man put the book down on a box and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. He told her his name was Thomas. He said he used to own this bookstore many years ago, before Sarah was even born. He had sold it to the current owner, but there was something he had left behind by mistake. Something very important to him. Sarah listened, but she was still scared. Thomas seemed nice, but she did not know if she should believe him. Anyone could say they used to own the store. How could she know if it was true? Thomas seemed to understand her fear. He reached into his coat pocket slowly. He pulled out an old photograph. It showed a younger man standing in front of the bookstore. The man in the photo looked like Thomas, but with dark hair instead of gray. The bookstore in the photo looked different too. The sign was different and the windows had different curtains. But it was definitely the same building. Sarah could tell. By the shape of the door and the way the street looked, Thomas explained that he had hidden the book many years ago. He was afraid someone might steal it because it was very valuable. He had planned to come back for it, but then he moved to another city. Years passed and he almost forgot about it, but recently Thomas had remembered the book. He needed it now because his daughter was getting married. The book had belonged to his family for many generations. It was supposed to be passed down to the next generation. He wanted to give it to his daughter as a wedding gift. Sarah looked at the old book. It did not look like it was worth much money. The cover was plain brown leather. There was no title on the front, but she could see that it was very old. Maybe it was valuable because of its age. Thomas saw her looking at the book. He picked it up and opened it carefully. The pages were yellow and thin. Sarah could see that it was handwritten. Someone had written the whole book by hand with a pen. He told her it was a book of family stories and recipes. His great-grandmother had written it long ago. Each generation had added new stories and recipes to it. It was like a history of his whole family written in one book. Sarah began to feel sorry for Thomas. If the book really belonged to his family, then he should have it, especially if his daughter was getting married. But she was still not sure if his story was true. Thomas seemed to know what she was thinking. He asked if she wanted to call the store owner to check his story. He said he would wait while she made the call. He even gave her the owner's phone number from memory. Sarah thought this was a good idea. If Thomas was lying, he would not want her to call the owner. But if he was telling the truth, then the owner would remember him. She decided to go upstairs and make the call. As she started to go up the stairs, Thomas called her name. She turned around to look at him. He thanked her for not calling the police right away. He said most people would have been more scared and would not have listened to his story. Sarah went upstairs and found the phone. She dialed the number Thomas had given her. The phone rang several times before someone answered. It was the store owner, Mr. Johnson. Sarah explained what had happened and asked if he knew someone named Thomas. Mr. Johnson was quiet for a long moment after Sarah told him about Thomas. Then he made a sound like he was surprised. He asked Sarah to describe what Thomas looked like. Sarah told him about the gray hair and the kind eyes and the old photograph. Mr. Johnson said yes, he remembered Thomas very well. Thomas had owned the bookstore for 20 years before selling it to him, Mr. Johnson said. Thomas was a good man who loved books just like Sarah did. He was surprised that Thomas had come back after so many years. Sarah felt much better after talking to Mr. Johnson. She thanked him and hung up the phone. Then she went back down to the basement. Thomas was sitting on an old chair, still holding the family book. He looked up when he heard her coming down the stairs. She told Thomas that Mr. Johnson remembered him and said it was okay for him to take the book. Thomas smiled and his eyes looked happy. He stood up and thanked Sarah many times. He said she was very kind to help him, but then Thomas looked sad again. He told Sarah there was a problem. The book was not complete. He had hidden it in 2 parts to keep it safe. One part was in this basement, which he had just found, but the other part was hidden somewhere else in the town. Sarah asked him where the other part was hidden. Thomas said he had put it in the old church at the end of the street. The church had been empty for many years. He had hidden the second part of the book under the floor in the church basement. Thomas explained that he had split the book because it was too valuable to keep in one place. If someone found one part, they would not have the complete book. Both parts were needed to make the whole story of his family. Sarah thought about this. The old church had been closed for as long as she could remember. No one went there anymore. The building was old, and some people said it was not safe to go inside. But if Thomas needed the other part of the book for his daughter's wedding, then someone had to help him get it. Thomas said he was too old to climb down into the church basement by himself. The stairs were broken, and it was dangerous. He asked Sarah if she would help him. He promised to pay her for her time. Sarah looked at Thomas. She could see that he really needed help. His daughter's wedding was in 1 week. If he did not get both parts of the book, he could not give it to her as a wedding gift. The family tradition would be broken. She decided to help him. But first, she had to open the bookstore for the day. Customers would come soon, and she needed to be ready. Thomas said he would wait for her. He could help her in the store if she wanted. Sarah and Thomas went upstairs together. Thomas looked around the bookstore and smiled. He said it looked much better now than when he owned it. Sarah had organized the books very well, and the store felt warm and welcoming. The first customer came in at 9 o'clock. It was an old woman who came every Tuesday to buy romance novels. She looked at Thomas with curiosity, but Sarah introduced him as a friend who was visiting. The woman bought 2 books and left. More customers came during the morning. Thomas helped Sarah by reaching books on high shelves and carrying heavy boxes. He knew where everything was because he had set up the store many years ago. Sarah was surprised at how much he remembered. During lunchtime, when no customers were in the store, Sarah and Thomas talked more about the book. Thomas showed her some of the pages. The handwriting was beautiful but hard to read. Some pages had drawings of flowers and birds. Other pages had recipes for bread and soup and cake. Thomas told Sarah that his great-grandmother had been a very good cook. She had written down all her recipes so her children would remember them. Then his grandmother had added her own recipes. Each woman in the family had added something to the book. Sarah asked Thomas about his daughter. Thomas smiled and said she was a teacher in another city. She was going to marry a doctor who was very kind. Thomas had never told his daughter about the family book because he wanted it to be a surprise. At 3 o'clock, Sarah closed the store for lunch. This was the perfect time to go to the old church. Most people in the town would be at work or at home eating lunch. No one would see them go into the church. Sarah and Thomas walked down the street together. The church was only 5 minutes away. It was a big stone building with tall windows. Some of the windows were broken and covered with boards. The front door had a chain and lock on it, but Thomas knew another way in. He led Sarah around to the back of the church. There was a small door that was hidden behind some bush. Thomas pushed the bush away and tried the door. It was locked, but the lock was very old and rusty. Thomas took a small tool from his pocket. He worked on the lock for a few minutes. Then it opened with a click. The door made a loud noise when it opened. Sarah looked around to make sure no one had heard them. Inside the church, it was dark and cold. Dust was everywhere. The wooden benches were still there, but they were covered with old sheets. Light came through the broken windows and made strange shadows on the walls. Thomas had brought a flashlight. He turned it on, and the light showed them the way. They walked carefully between the old benches. Their footsteps made echoes in the big empty space. The front of the church, there was a small door. Thomas said this led to the basement. The door was not locked, but it was hard to open. Sarah and Thomas had to push it together. Finally it opened and they could see stairs going down. The stairs were made of stone and they were very old. Some of the steps were broken. Thomas went first with the flashlight. Sarah followed behind him. She held onto the wall to keep from falling. The basement was smaller than the church above. It smelled like old water and dirt. There were no windows, so it was completely dark except for Thomas's flashlight. The floor was made of stone too. Thomas walked to the far corner of the basement. He counted his steps carefully. Then he stopped and pointed the light at the floor. Sarah could see that some of the stones were different from the others. They were newer and not as dirty. Thomas knelt down and started to move the stones. They were heavy, but he was able to lift them. Under the stones was a small hole. Thomas reached into the hole and pulled out a package wrapped in old cloth. He opened the cloth carefully. Inside was the other part of the family book. It looked just like the first part, but the pages were different. Thomas held both parts of the book together. Now the family story was complete. Sarah felt happy for Thomas. He had found what he was looking for. His daughter would have a wonderful wedding. Gift. The family tradition would continue, but as they started to leave the basement, they heard a sound from upstairs. Someone was walking around in the church. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor above them. Thomas turned off his flashlight quickly. They stood very still in the dark basement. The footsteps moved around the church for several minutes. Then they heard a voice calling out. Someone was looking for them. Sarah felt scared again. Who could be in the church? And why were they looking for Sarah and Thomas? Sarah and Thomas waited in the dark basement. The footsteps above them stopped moving. Then they heard the voice again. It was a woman's voice. She was calling Thomas's name. Thomas looked surprised. He whispered to Sarah that he knew that voice. It sounded like his daughter Emma, but why would she be here? She lived in another city and was not supposed to come until the wedding next week. The voice called again. This time Sarah could hear it more clearly. The woman was definitely calling. For Thomas, she sounded worried. Thomas decided to answer. He called back to let her know where they were. The footsteps came toward the basement door. Then they heard someone coming down the stone steps. Thomas turned his flashlight back on. A young woman appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She had long brown hair and looked very much like Thomas. She was wearing a blue coat and carrying a big bag. When she saw Thomas, she ran to him and gave him a big hug. Sarah could see that this was indeed his daughter Emma. Emma asked Thomas what he was doing in the old church basement. She looked confused and a little angry. She said she had been looking for him all morning. She had gone to his hotel, but he was not there. Then she had gone to the bookstore and the owner told her Thomas had been there with Sarah. Thomas looked embarrassed. He had not told Emma he was coming to town early. He wanted the book to be a surprise for her wedding. But now she had found him before he could finish his plan. Emma noticed the old book parts in Thomas's hands. She asked what they were. Thomas smiled and said these were her real wedding gift. He explained about the family book and how he had hidden it years ago. Emma's eyes grew wide as Thomas told her the story. She had never heard about the family book before. Thomas opened both parts and showed her some of the pages. Emma looked at the old handwriting and the recipes with wonder. She read some of the stories out loud. There were stories about her great-great-grandmother who had come from another country. There were stories about family celebrations and sad times too. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she realized this book contained the history of her whole family. Thomas told Emma that every woman in their family had added to this book. Now it was her turn. After she got married, she could write her own stories and recipes in it. Then someday she could give it to her daughter. Emma hugged Thomas again. She said this was the best wedding gift anyone could ever give her. It was much better than jewelry or money. This book was part of who she was, but then Emma remembered why she had come to town early. She looked serious and told Thomas they had a problem. Her future husband David was missing. He had disappeared 3 days ago and no one knew where he was. Thomas was shocked. He asked Emma what had happened. Emma said David had been acting strange for the past week. He seemed worried about something but would not tell her what was wrong. Then on Sunday morning she woke up and he was gone. He had left no note or message. Emma had called David's friends and family, but no one had seen him. She had called the police, but they said he had to be missing for longer before they would start looking for him. Emma was very scared that something bad had happened to David. Sarah listened to this story with concern. She asked Emma if David had any enemies or problems that might make him want to disappear. Emma said no. David was a doctor and everyone liked him. He had no debts or troubles that she knew about. Then Emma said something that made Sarah very interested. She said David had been asking questions about old books recently. He wanted to know if there were any valuable books in their family. Emma had told him no because she did not know about the family book. Thomas looked worried when he heard this. He asked Emma exactly what David had said about old books. Emma said David had asked if Thomas had ever mentioned any books that might be worth a lot of money. Sarah began to understand what might have happened. Maybe David had found out about the family book somehow. Maybe he had come to this town to look for it. But if David was looking for the book, where was he now? Thomas had the same thought. He asked Emma if David knew about the bookstore. Emma said yes. David knew that Thomas used to own a bookstore in this town. David had asked many questions about it. Suddenly, Sarah remembered something. Earlier that morning, before she found Thomas in the basement, she had seen muddy footprints in the bookstore. But Thomas's shoes were clean. Someone else had been in? The store before Thomas arrived. Sarah told Thomas and Emma about the footprints. She said someone had been in the bookstore very early in the morning. Maybe it was David. Maybe he had been looking for the book too. Emma became very excited. If David had been in the bookstore, then he was somewhere in the town. Emma wanted to go look for him right away. But Thomas said they should think carefully about where David might be. If David was looking for the old book, he would go to places where Thomas might have hidden it. David knew about the bookstore, but how would he know about the church? Thomas had never told anyone about hiding the book in two places. Then Thomas remembered something. Years ago, he had written a letter to his brother about hiding the book. In the letter, he had mentioned both the bookstore and the church. Thomas's brother had died 5 years ago, but maybe David had found the letter somehow. Emma said this was possible. David had helped clean out Thomas's brother's house after he died. David could have found the letter then. But Emma did not understand why David would want the book so much that he would disappear to find it. Thomas looked sad. He said maybe David wanted to sell the book for money. Old books could be worth thousands of dollars to collectors. Maybe David had gambling debts or other money problems that Emma did not know about. Emma did not want to believe this. She said David was a good man who would never steal from family. But she admitted that David had been acting very strange lately. Maybe he was in some kind of trouble. Sarah suggested they go back to the bookstore and look for more clues. If David had been there, maybe he had left something behind. They could also call David's phone and see if he would answer. The three of them left the church basement together. Thomas put the stones back over the hole where the book had been hidden. He wanted to leave everything the way they had found it, outside. The church, the sun was shining brightly. It felt good to be out of the dark basement. But Emma still looked very worried about David. Thomas put his arm around her shoulder and told her they would find him. They walked back to the bookstore together. Sarah opened the door and they went inside. Emma called David's phone number, but it went straight to voicemail. She left a message asking him to call her back immediately. Thomas looked around the bookstore more carefully this time. He was looking for any sign that David had been there. Sarah showed him the muddy footprints, but they were almost dry now. And hard to see. Then Thomas noticed something strange. One of the basement boxes had been moved. When he had searched that morning, all the boxes were in neat rows. But now one box was turned slightly different from the others. Thomas went down to the basement with Sarah and Emma following. He looked at the box that had been moved. Inside were old papers and receipts from when he owned the store. Nothing seemed to be missing, but then Sarah noticed something on the floor. It was a small piece of paper with writing on it. She picked it up and read it. The paper had David's name and phone number written on it. At the bottom, someone had written an address. Emma looked at the address and gasped. She knew where it was. It was an old house on the edge of town that had been empty for years. Emma said David had mentioned that house once. He said it looked like it might fall down soon. Thomas asked why David would go to an empty house. Emma said she did not know. But if David was really there, they had to go find him. Something might be wrong. David might be hurt or in trouble. Sarah said she would go with them. She closed the bookstore and put a sign on the door saying she would be back later. Then the three of them got into Emma's car and drove toward the old house at the edge of town. Emma drove her car through the quiet streets of the town. Thomas sat in the front seat holding the complete family book. Sarah sat in the back seat looking out the window. They were all thinking about David and hoping he was safe. The old house was at the end of a dirt road. Trees grew thick around it and the grass was very tall. Emma parked the car near the front gate. The gate was made of old metal and had rust all over it. They got out of the car and looked at the house. It was big but very old. The paint was falling off the walls. Some windows were broken and covered with boards. The front porch was falling. Down on one side, Emma called David's name loudly. Her voice echoed around the empty yard, but there was no answer. Thomas said maybe David was inside the house and could not hear them. Sarah noticed that the front door was open just a little bit. Someone had definitely been here recently. She pointed this out to Thomas and Emma. Emma wanted to run to the house right away, but Thomas told her to be careful. They walked slowly to the front porch. The wooden steps made loud noises under their feet. Some of the boards were broken and they had to step carefully. Emma called David's name again, but still got no answer. Thomas pushed the front door open wider. It made a long creaking sound. Inside the house it was dark and dusty. Old furniture was covered with white sheets. Spider webs hung from the ceiling. Emma went into the house first. She was not afraid because she wanted to find David so badly. Thomas and Sarah followed her. Thomas had brought his flashlight from the church so they could see better. The house smelled like old wood and dampness. Their footsteps echoed in the empty rooms. Emma looked in every room on the first floor. There was a kitchen with an old stove. There was a living room with a big fireplace. But there was no sign of David. Then they heard a sound from upstairs. It sounded like someone walking around. Emma's face lit up with hope. She called David's name toward the ceiling. This time they heard a voice answer back. It was David's voice. He was calling Emma's name. He sounded happy but also weak. Emma ran to the stairs and started going up quickly. Thomas and Sarah followed her. The stairs were old and some of them were loose. They had to hold on to the railing to keep from falling. At the top of the stairs was a long hallway with many doors. Emma called David's name again. David's voice came from the last room at the end of the hall. Emma ran to the door and tried to open it. But the door was locked from the outside. Someone had put a big piece of wood across the door to keep it shut. Emma asked David if he was okay. David said he was not hurt, but he was very tired and hungry. He had been locked in the room for 2 days. Emma asked him who had locked him in. David said it was a man he did not know. The man had tricked him into coming to the house. The man had said he wanted to buy some old books from David, but when David got to the house, the man had locked him in the room. Thomas and Sarah helped Emma move the piece of wood away from the door. It was heavy and they had to work together. Finally, they got it moved and the door opened. David was sitting on the floor in the corner of the room. He looked very tired and his clothes were dirty. When he saw Emma, he smiled and tried to stand up. Emma ran to him and hugged him tight. David was happy to see Emma, but he looked confused when he saw Thomas and Sarah. Emma quickly explained who they were and why they were all together. David listened with surprise as Emma told him about the family book. Then David told them his story. He said he had gotten a phone call 3 days ago. A man had called and said he knew about an old valuable book that belonged to Thomas's family. The man said he wanted to buy the book and would pay a lot of money for it. David had been curious about this because he knew Emma's family might have valuable things. The man had said he would meet David at this old house to talk about the book. David had come to the meeting, but it was a trap. When David got to the house, the man was waiting for him. The man asked David many questions about the book. He wanted to know where it was hidden and how to get it. But David did not know anything about the book, so he could not answer. The man got angry when David could not help him. He locked David in the upstairs room and said he would not let him out until David told him where the book was. David had been trapped there for 2 days with no food or water. Thomas asked David what the man looked like. David said he was about 40 years old with black hair. He was tall and wore expensive clothes. He had a scar on his left hand. David had never seen this man before. Emma was angry that someone had hurt David. She wanted to call the police right away. But Thomas said they should get David out of the house first. The man might come back and they did not want to be trapped there too. They helped David walk down the stairs. He was weak from not eating for 2 days. Sarah had brought some water and crackers from the bookstore. David drank the water quickly and ate the crackers. As they were leaving the house, Thomas noticed something strange. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the house. Someone had been there very recently. Maybe the man who had trapped David was still around somewhere. They got into Emma's car quickly. Emma started the engine and drove away from the house as fast as she could. David sat in the back seat with Sarah. He was feeling better after drinking the water and eating the crackers. As they drove back to town, David asked to see the family book. Thomas showed him both parts of the book. David looked at the old pages with interest. He said he could understand why someone would want to steal such a special book, but David was confused about something. He asked Thomas how the man who called him had known about the book. Thomas had kept it secret for so many years. Only a few people knew it existed. Thomas thought about this question. He remembered the letter he had written to his brother years ago. Maybe someone had found that letter after his brother died? But who would have access to his brother's things besides family members? Emma said she and David had helped clean out the brother's house, but they were not the only ones there. The brother's neighbor had also helped, and there had been some workers who came to fix things in the house. Sarah suggested that maybe one of those people had found the letter and decided to try to steal the book. If they knew the book was valuable, they might think they could sell it for a lot of money. David said this made sense. The man who had trapped him had seemed to know a lot about the book. He knew it was old and valuable. He also knew it belonged to Thomas's family, but there was still one big problem. The man was still out there somewhere. He still wanted the book, and he had shown that he was willing to hurt people to get it. Thomas, Emma, David, and Sarah were all in danger as long as this man was looking for them. Emma asked what they should do. Thomas said they had to go to the police now. Even though they had found David, the man had committed a crime by locking him up. The police needed to catch this man before he hurt someone else. They drove straight to the police station in the center of town. It was a small building with only a few police officers. Emma parked the car and they all went inside together. The police officer at the front desk listened to their story with interest. He wrote down all the details about David being trapped and about the mysterious man. He said they would send officers to search the old house right away, but the police officer also said something that worried them. He said there had been other reports of someone breaking into old buildings around town. Someone was definitely looking for something valuable. The police had been trying to catch this person for weeks. The police officer's name was Officer Martinez. He had been working in the town for 10 years and knew about all the break-ins. He told them that someone had been getting into old buildings at night. Libraries, antique shops, and even private homes had been searched. Officer Martinez said the person was looking for something specific. They never took money or jewelry. They only looked through old books and papers. Now it made sense. The mysterious man was searching for Thomas's family book. Officer Martinez asked Thomas to describe the book in detail. Thomas explained about the two parts and the old handwriting. He told the officer that the book had been in his family for many generations and was very important to them. The officer said they needed to be very careful. If this man was willing to kidnap David, he might try to hurt other people too. Officer Martinez suggested that Thomas and his family should stay together and not go anywhere alone. But Thomas was worried about something else. He asked Officer Martinez what would happen if the man found out that they had already recovered the book. Would that make them safer or more dangerous? Officer Martinez thought about this question. He said it could go either way. The man might give up if he knew the book was already found, but he might also try harder to steal it from them. Either way, they needed to catch this criminal before he hurt anyone else. The police officer said he would put extra patrol cars around the town that night. He also gave Emma his phone number and told her to call immediately if they saw anything suspicious. He warned them not to try to catch the man themselves. After they left the police station, Emma suggested they all stay together at Thomas's hotel. The hotel was in the center of town where there were lots of people around. It would be safer than staying in separate places. Thomas agreed this was a good idea. But first they needed to get some food for David. He had not eaten a real meal for 2 days and was still very weak. They found a small restaurant near the hotel and ordered soup and sandwiches. While they were eating, Thomas told David and Emma more stories about the family book. He explained how each generation of women had added their own recipes and stories. Some of the recipes were for special occasions like weddings and birthdays. Emma was fascinated by these stories. She asked Thomas if she could start reading the book right away. She wanted to learn about all the women in her family who had come before her. Thomas smiled and said she could read it as much as she wanted. David apologized to Thomas for getting involved in this dangerous situation. He said he should not have trusted the stranger who called him. Thomas told David not to worry about it. The important thing was that David was safe now. After they finished eating, they went to Thomas's hotel room. It was a small room with 2 beds and a table. Thomas put the family book on the table where they could all look at it. Emma sat down and started reading the old pages carefully. Sarah said she should probably go back to her own apartment. She had already missed a whole day of work at the bookstore, but Thomas asked her to stay with them. He said she had become part of this adventure and they wanted to make sure she was safe too. Emma agreed with her father. She said Sarah had been very brave to help them find the book and rescue David. Sarah decided to stay. She called the bookstore owner and explained that she would not be able to open the store the next day either. As the evening got darker, they began to feel nervous. Every sound in the hotel hallway made them look toward the door. David kept checking to make sure the door was locked. Thomas closed the curtains so no one could see into the room from outside. Around 9 o'clock, Emma's phone rang. She looked at the number but did not recognize it. She answered the phone carefully. A man's voice spoke to her. It was not David's voice or anyone else she knew. The man said he knew Emma had found the old book. He said he wanted to make a deal with her. If she gave him the book, he would not bother her family anymore. If she did not give him the book, bad things would happen. Emma's hands shook as she listened to the man. She asked him how he had gotten her phone number. The man laughed and said he knew many things about her family. He knew where they were staying and what they were doing. The man told Emma to meet him at midnight at the old church. She should bring the book and come alone. If anyone else came with her, he would disappear and they would never be safe again. Emma hung up the phone and told the others what the man had said. David was very angry. He said they should call Officer Martinez right away. But Thomas was not sure this was the best idea. Thomas pointed out that the man seemed to know a lot about what they were doing. Maybe he was watching them somehow. If they called the police, he might see the police cars and run away. Then they would never catch him. Sarah had an idea. She said maybe they could set a trap for the man. They could pretend to do what he wanted but have the police waiting nearby. When the man came to get the book, the police could arrest him. Emma liked this idea, but she was scared. The man had said she had to come alone. What if something went wrong? What if the man hurt her before the police could help? David said he would not let Emma go to meet this dangerous man. It was too risky, but Emma said they had to do something. If they did not stop this man, their family would never be safe. Thomas made a decision. He said he would go to meet the man instead of Emma. The man wanted the book, and Thomas was the one who knew the most about it. Maybe Thomas could convince the man to leave their family alone, but Emma and David both said no. They said Thomas was too old to face this dangerous man alone. Sarah suggested that maybe they should all go together. They could hide nearby while one person met with the man. They spent the next hour making a plan. Emma would call Officer Martinez and tell him about the phone call. The police could hide around the church and wait for the man to show up. Emma would go to the meeting, but David, Thomas, and Sarah would be hidden nearby to help if needed. Officer Martinez was very interested when Emma called him. He said this was exactly the chance they needed to catch the criminal. He promised to have several police officers hidden around the church before midnight, but Officer Martinez was worried about Emma's safety too. He said the police could not guarantee that nothing would happen to her during the meeting. He asked if there was any other way to catch the man. Thomas had another idea. He suggested they could give the man a fake book instead of the real one. Thomas could make a copy of some pages and put them in an old cover. The man might not notice it was fake until after the police caught him. Sarah thought this was a clever idea. She said she had some old books at the bookstore that looked similar to the family book. They could use one of those books and put some copied pages inside it. Emma agreed to this plan. Even if the man discovered the fake book, at least the real family book would still be safe. And if the plan worked, the police would catch the man, and their troubles would be over. They had less than 3 hours to prepare everything. Sarah went back to her bookstore to get an old book that looked like the family book. Thomas started copying some of the pages by hand to put in the fake book. Emma and David called Officer Martinez again to tell him about the new plan. Officer Martinez said it was a good idea, but they all needed to be very careful. This man had already shown that he was dangerous and desperate. As midnight got closer, they all felt more and more nervous. They hoped their plan would work, but they also knew that many things could go wrong. The next few hours would determine whether they could finally stop this man and keep the family book safe.